Yes,
Uh,
Good morning. Good morning, all.
good morning, Miss.
Shall we start?
Yes, Miss.
Last week, where we ended the upper limb fractures. Shall we? Did we started that upper limb fractures?
If not mistaken, yeah.
Okay, today, I think we completed clavicle fracture, right? Okay, so one of the horizontal bones in a very rare bone, but children's, it's very common in kids. This type of fractures are very common in kids, and the most common one is the middle third. Okay, so 80% of thing is the middle third of clavicle. We divide, right? We divide the fracture into the proximal 1/3, middle and distal. Proximal, middle and distal, and out of that, the middle third most commonly occurs, and it is easy, also more stable fracture. So compared to other types of fracture, I already told you, I think, that is the shaft fractures. Whenever it is, if it is closer to your joint line, that is the metaphysis or diaphysis, metaphysis and epiphysis, this areas, that is this regions are very risky. Likewise, this area in the middle one, the shaft, means it's more stable compared to this distal and proximal fractures, and also the healing is easy, and the rehabilitation part also, we don't have to worry about that improvement. Okay, so always the shaft fractures, wherever it is, the femur or the humerus also, if it is occurs in the middle third, it is easy to heal as well as easy to rehabilitate also, compared to the closer to joint line. So whenever it is, the more complicated one is the distal end, that is in the shoulder, near to the shoulder joint. right? That area, if the fracture occurs in that area, maybe you have more delicate structures, that is a rotator cuff, and you have some important ligament, the coracoclavicular, more stable, the stability provider of your shoulder complex. The coracoclavicular ligament is there. So we need to act, whenever it is the distal third, means you need to be more careful with that other associated structures, that is our rotator cuff, or this coracoclavicular ligament, or AC joint involvement. We have so many things that need to be considered, and also check about shoulder joint. Is there any shoulder joint involvement, or is there any instability along with that fracture? Is there any loss of stability in the shoulder complex? Everything we need to be careful whenever it is distal third. Middle third, this kind of things are very rare. So most of the middle third fractures are stable one, and we don't need surgical measurements also. Just conservative management is enough for middle third. 90% of middle third cases we can treat it conservatively. But if it is the complex one, or is there any soft tissue injuries or more higher, then we have to go for surgical correction. Okay, so the clinical features, we all know that the main important clinical features of any type of fracture is pain, swelling, deformity. You can see that some abnormality in your bone placements, and inability to raise the shoulder because the final degrees are contributed by your clavicle. The clavicular rotation and clavicular movement is important for the elevation and that last degrees. Okay, elevation through flexion and elevation through abduction is contributed by the clavicular movement also. So there is an inability to raise the shoulder to the last degrees, and maybe due to pain they won't cooperate for just in the initial ranges also. And sometimes there is due to the shock and sudden contraction, your muscle may go for spasm or inhibition. It doesn't work. Okay, we call it pseudo paralysis. Okay, so mostly sling immobilization. Just you need to be, if it is a stable one, stable fracture means it's just a crack and there is no displacement or mild displacement, means you can go for closed treatment. So in the closed treatment, you can apply slings for, because here this is not a place where you can apply casters, POP cast and all. It's very difficult to apply. So the sling support, we have last class also we have discussed, right, the different types of immobilizers. You have collars, cuff and collar, or figure of 8 bandages, or so many things you can have for 3 to 4 weeks. And one more thing is here, the shoulder joint restriction is very high. Whenever you immobilize, you have like a shoulder adhesion, or maybe later on you may get arthritis or periarthritis shoulder. These problems, the chances for these problems are very high. So what we prefer is, if it is a stable fracture, you can start yearly. Okay, yearly range of motion is always encourageable. Okay, so the other important thing is the associated structures, because any type of fracture can occur with, like I told you, the bone itself gets broken, means you have high chances for other soft tissues also to be get damaged, right? So in that thing, you need to be careful, or you need to be aware of other associated structures. What is the problem? Is there any maybe life-threatening situation may also arise, because some arteries, major arteries, the brachial artery, and you have the subclavian one, axillary artery, so many crucial vessels or located here. We need to be careful with the associated problems. Okay, and one more thing, if it is a medial third, the medial 1/3 of fracture means there is a greater chance for rib fractures also. because more stable compared to middle third and distal third. This proximal end is more how to say, more stable. But if it is getting fractured means you need to check the uh, other associated joints also. That is rib fractures also very commonly occurs, and if so, you need to check for any damage to the vital organs like your lungs or pleural damage. Everything can cause pneumothorax, or we all know that pulmonary embolism. So many life-threatening situation may arise if there is damage to your this organs. So the complication, you need to aware of that, and if there is any associated problems, that should be taken into how to say that, you need to immediately treat that problem. After that, you can slowly go for a fracture management. Okay, so these are all immediate, and then late complications. Because of immobilization or because of that restriction of movements, you have some other problems, or sometimes errors during reduction. That is, if you are fixing that shoulder, fixing the fracture segment in line, that time you may be you're not perfect in align the bone. In that way, it can cause mal union. And then non-union also is there. Sometimes that the vessel anatomy will decide, is there a, because some in some areas we have blood supply from distal to proximal. That is, the arteries may wind up, or arteries may go up somewhere else. In that scenario, you have there is a greater chance for non-union to be occur. So here, very important is the muscles around this area are very powerful. All the important muscles, sternocleido, the neck muscle, sternocleidomastoid, and you have pectoralis major and deltoid. Deltoid is a pure abductor, very important. The primary abductors you have, and if there is loss of that muscle, you cannot achieve abduction. And then the pectoralis major, the flexors and adductors, one of the important for all the daily activities, right? So if there is any problem with that or weakness means, you need to rehabilitate immediately. Whenever it's safe to start, you have to start muscle strengthening for these groups. And sternocleidomastoid, and achieve functional activities. The main thing is we need to return back to their near normal life. And so the first week you have to apply the figure of 8, and this are all I already we discussed it. Like, right, you have to check this one. After second week, you can start gentle pendular movement and isometric exercises, because there is a greater chance for this bulky muscles, right? This kind of muscles goes for weakness or atrophy easily. So we need to be very specific about isometrics. And one more thing, rotator cuff also. This muscle also goes for wasting if you are not using it for continuously for one week or 10 days. So just start doing isometrics. And after that, after 6 weeks, itself, we can start our active range of motion exercises. Okay, so but in that thing also, no weight bearing is allowed. We have one protocol. If you want, we can see that. we need to follow the protocol, right? So how they divide it, because different books have, can you see this PDF rehabilitation protocol for clavicular fracture?
Can miss.
Okay, so different fractures and different books follow different, because we have different schools, right? So in some hospitals they follow some protocols, and but safe side is you always discuss it with your orthopedic physician, okay, along with them. And like it's a team approach. You need to discuss with them whatever you find it, whatever the feedback you are giving, they need to receive and then improvise it, or they give suggestions accordingly. So it's like a team approach. Nowadays we are not following like boss, and we need to follow everything is discussing, and the final result is the improvement of the patient and yearly recovery. That is what our main motive. So so here you can see that they divide it like that. What we follow is for first week what is the management, and second week, second to third week, or second to fourth week, and then after that fourth to sixth week, like that. Also some classifications are there, but it is up to us to decide. So in the first week, that is the first week means it's a purely pain. The problem is the pain. Because of that pain they won't cooperate if you ask them to do the active exercises also. So in the first week you can start isometrics and range of motion pendular exercises, but you have to be control the pain. So the pain management should be high. Maybe you can have painkillers, or sometimes our pain modalities. We can use the pain modalities like TENS, and this kind of things will work very effectively, or ice application. If it is manageable, we can use ice also. Like so, in the first week is purely pain control, and if there is no pain, you can start the movement. Otherwise, they won't cooperate, because it's an active exercise. All are active, no passive. Only if it is like very rarely we can start the passive in early stages. Okay, just remember that passive. What I'm saying, the passive means the passive stretching, passive mobilization, everything is in the acute and subacute phase. You are not strictly allowed. In very rare cases, if it is very comfortable and if it is very stable, very stable kind of thing, also you need to discuss with your physician. Otherwise, don't start passive movements, or passive stretching, or passive mobilization. Everything should be avoided in this acute and subacute. Okay, only active. Just remember this, then you don't make a big blunders. Okay, so because if you know some do's compared to do's, if you know what you are not going to do, then it is easy for us, right? So always the passive should be extended to chronic stage, or minimum protection phase. That is the stage where you can start the rehabilitation without any restrictions. Okay, that is always comes after sixth week. Okay, so whenever the rehabilitation is free of restrictions, or after sixth week, most of the fractures of upper limb you can start after sixth week. And sometimes if it is unstable or more complicated, or more combinated fractures and all, you can delay it for 1 or 2 weeks. Otherwise, after 6 weeks, if it is a stable fracture, after 6 weeks, you can start the rehabilitation, like the strict rehabilitation can be started. So the sling application, you need to advise the patient. That is very important. That is most of the time for the whole 2 weeks, for the whole first 2 weeks, they have to be in the slings. Okay. That sometimes they ignore it because it can be removable, right? So they avoid using that, or they hang the limb by the side. These are all going to delay the healing. So you need to be you are in position to advise them properly about the when to immobilize, what is the period. Sometimes they doctors don't have time to explain everything in detail. So if you are in that situation, you need to explain to them the crucial first 2 weeks. And when they can remove is that, like while taking bath or removing the sling for 4 to 5 times, only during that time they are allowed to remove the sling, that is to do pendular exercises. Okay. And one more thing is, mainly because of pain, they won't do that. Okay, they won't elevate the arm because fear of pain or fear of movement, they won't elevate. But in case if they are so bold or maybe they are a sports person and all, you just advise them, don't allow them to elevate above 90 degrees, because we already know after 90 degrees only you have your clavicular movements get started. Other than that, you all know that, right? The scapulohumeral rhythm, in that thing, only after 90 degrees our clavicle and scapula plays a major role in that elevation movements. So just ask them to restrict that for first 6 weeks, right? And also weightlifting, don't lift any objects over 1 or 2 pounds. Okay, so for that first 6 weeks, and avoid excessive stretching, that is going to the full point or full restriction point is avoided. For the first 6 weeks, avoid excessive reaching and external and internal rotation for the first 6 weeks. Okay, these are all the important points. And the wound the cleanliness and hygiene of the wound area is also very important. And that is one thing. So in the first 6 weeks, what are the things you can do is, pendular exercises, supine external rotation. Just note down, I will show you the things, whatever the things. The pendular exercise, supine external rotation, supine assisted arm elevation, and limit to 90 degrees, and isometric exercises, elbow and forearm exercise, ball squeeze exercise, scapular retraction exercise. Okay. So in the first week, I told you the pain management is very important. So the TENS, ice, eat, or anything that subsides the pain can be used in painkiller. Okay, this is very, very important. The pendular exercises, you have to ask the patient to bend at the waist. Okay, so don't make them change the alignment of the spinal column. Just ask them to bend at the hip joint. Okay, so and then it should be like the injured arm should hang freely. Okay, that is very important. It should hang freely without any restriction or without any muscle activation. And then ask them to make small circles with hand. Okay, so because of that, weight and slow movement itself can create some momentum. Okay, so thereby it can, like when you start the exercise, it will rotate or it will circle it by itself. Okay, so clockwise and anti-clockwise circles, this is very important in the acute stage. The pendular exercise, that is, don't lift or don't flex it too high, to higher ranges. Okay, just mildly away from your trunk, that is very important. And teach them whenever it's possible, when in their home also they can practice it. That is 4 to 5 times a day is very, very important. And then this one is supine external rotation exercise. Ask them to be in supine lying, place a towel roll under their elbow or distal arm, and then ask them to, because these are all very going to restrict. the rehabilitation process. So start doing external rotation. And if it's very difficult, maybe you can make them by the side of the, how to say that, don't lift to 90-degree, just by the side also you can do external rotation exercises. So if it is assisted things means you can use it with some.
My name is Hallie, and I'm a clinical assistant with O'Grady Orthopedics. Today I'll be showing you how to properly do shoulder external rotation with a dowel. Begin this exercise by lying on your back, holding a dowel in both hands and your injured arm out to your side with your elbow bent at 90 degrees. Using your other arm, slowly rotate the dowel and your arm downward within pain tolerance, then return to the starting position and repeat. Keep your elbow bent throughout the movement. Try not to arch your back as you move your arm.
So for whenever you, maybe 5 sessions, in each session you have to do 3 sets, 10 reps and 5-second hold. Okay, so this is assisted. So if it is difficult for them to do it by themselves, we can use this band exercise. It's a little bit easy for them because they are using their other limb. Okay, compared to passive assistance, that is like from the therapist, the self-assisted exercises are little bit logical, because they know the pain, they know the fear, everything, so they can manage it within their pain barrier or restriction barrier. They can control the movement, and along with that the improvement also can be achieved. So only thing, our role is motivate them to do that, encourage them to increase the ranges. So this is supine external rotation exercise. So it shouldn't be like a 90-degree abduction. If it is very difficult for them, whichever available range they have, you need to maintain that and start doing external rotation exercises. And then you have supine assisted elevation up to 90 degree. That is it. For the first few weeks, it's very impossible. So the goal set is up to 90 degree. Okay, so this are all self-assisted, and the band exercises, using band and use the other limb to promote the flexion. Okay, and after that, I told you the important muscles are deltoid and rotator cuff muscles. That needs to be like there is a greater chance for atrophy of this muscle. So we have, whenever there is any shoulder issues, shoulder injuries and all, you need to be careful with this rotator cuff muscle, because without that, or if it goes for weakness, then we have like it's a opening the Pandora box for that shoulder joint, because so many issues will come later on. They have so many problems like instability, or sometimes shoulder dislocation, or shoulder arthritis, or impingement syndrome. So the root cause for majority of the shoulder problem is rotator cuff weakness. So during that, any injuries, you need to be careful with maintaining the strength of the rotator cuff. Okay, so all the important rotation, internal and external rotation, abduction in the initial range. We all know that supraspinatus, the main role is the initial abduction, and teres minor and infraspinatus lateral rotation, and subscapularis you have medial rotation, right? So all the 4 muscles are very important for internal rotation, external rotation, abduction. So always concentrate on this movements. So isometrics, always make it in a neutral. It's not the main rule, but they won't allow you in some other ranges. The neutral is always easy and comfortable also. So neutral means the arm by the side of the trunk, And then external and internal rotation, just change the hand placement. Okay, we can in home as a home exercise, we can teach them how to do it in their home itself, or in the clinical setups you can do the isometrics. Just ask them to resist your hand force. Okay, so the supine lying is more comfortable, and after that you can progress it to standing to the any wall or any barrier, wall or door, whatever it is. For external rotation, place the resistance on the dorsal aspect of your forearm. Okay, and for internal rotation, just give it on the ventral aspect. Okay, so that is a without any change in the movement. That is also very important. Don't change your limb position. That is, shoulder joint shouldn't be moved, or elbow joint. Everything should be in static position and just give resistance. Okay, that is what the main role of isometric. You're increasing the tension without any movement. So just they feel the contraction. That's it. So this thing also can be held for each and every session, 3 sets and 10-second hold and 10 repetition. And then isometric triceps exercise. This is elbow 90-degree flexed arm by the side, and ask them to push the couch. Okay, so this is also that is through entire forearm. Don't allow them to do it only through hand region. Okay, if they do that, then only it's going to be around your elbow joint. Okay, so we need to concentrate on the whole muscle. Means you have to the resistance can be applied from throughout the forearm and hand region. Okay, after that, grip and grip strength exercises. Okay, so all the hand grip exercises you can start, like a small fist, and build this type of intrinsic plus position. Actually, this is what we call it, intrinsic plus position. That is, the eyepiece are extended and MCP is flexed to 90 degrees. And like how you hold any small objects, that is what we call it, intrinsic plus position. And make a O sign, and spread fingers and close it, and then lateral pinch, maybe key, how you will grasp the key and all, like that, coin or having a key, that kind of exercises. And then this ball squeezing or the therapeutic putty exercises. These are very widely used. Okay, and it's very effective also for all the shoulder joint exercises. If it doesn't involve your wrist and hand region, you can follow this grip strength exercises, because after immobilization they may develop weakness in this grip strength muscles, because hand muscles are very small, and they easily go for atrophy. Okay, so all the ball squeezing exercises and therapeutic putty exercises, that is the glay kind of thing. Elastic glaze can be used to do different types of rolls, and opening and closing the fingers, and squeeze the whole, use your fist, this kind of things. Or just remember this, you can use it for all types of upper limb fracture immobilization. I won't tell you for each and everything, just go through that. These are this, you can apply it for all types of fractures. So if it is a hand fracture or if it is a wrist injuries, you need to delay it for, like, maybe if it's come to the minimum protection phase, then only you start this, like after 6 weeks. Okay, if it involves wrist joint or distal radius fracture or MCP, or any other small joints or small bones, then you can delay it. Otherwise, up to forearm, up to elbow fractures, you can give it in the acute stage itself. And you can have this kind of elastic grips can be used for palm squeeze, the finger squeeze, and wrist bend and finger squeeze. Okay. So both wrist flexion and extension. And neutral, in the neutral, you can squeeze the any elastic thing. And radial deviation, ulnar deviation, okay, and extension and flexion. In all the things also you have to develop the squeezing action. Okay, this will help you in improve the hand strength grip. And then you can do this also very important, because they may develop, like after fracture immobilization, they develop protraction of shoulder joint that need to be corrected. Otherwise, this also like a chain reaction. After that, you may develop protraction may lead to cervical problems. Everything, the root causes the protraction of your shoulder joint. So always the scapular retraction exercise can also be repeated. Okay, so these are the, for the first 6 weeks, 6 weeks you need to follow. After that, mostly it is stretching and strengthening. You can start all the stretching exercises, active movements, and then strengthening also. These are the various programs we have. TheraBand exercise, strengthening exercises using internal and external rotation, bicep curls, rows, forward punch. Okay, so if you want, we can see these things also. Yes, we will have you can see these types of exercises. Okay, after 7 weeks, you can give some passive stretching also. And if it is, if you're teaching them this type of exercise, if it is not coming to the full range, you can assist them. You can give some stretches, some mobilization. Everything is safe after 7 weeks. But when it's safe, you need to know, right? This type of strict rehabilitation, when it is safe, means check for radiographic findings for evidence. That is the callus formation and stable fracture, or it's disappeared, that gap or that crack is disappeared. That is one important evaluation we have. And one more thing is the check for tenderness on the fracture side. If there is any pain, or you feel the patient is not comfortable, or it's not easy for them, then you may be little gentle and slow in your rehabilitation process. Or sometimes the mobility, you can, it's not like check the full capable mobility. That is, don't use your full force. Mobility means fracture site movement. Is there any, you feel some mobility in that fracture site? Okay, it is also contraindication. You cannot start the all the passive movements or all the active exercises. You can little bit gentle. If it is like no tenderness on the fracture side, and no mobility you feel in the fracture side, no pain, and patient is comfortable and motivated in doing the movement, and the radiographic evidence also supports you, then you can have this. Because sometimes it's not clear, we cannot predict it that easily. Maybe it is like some complications or some problems may delay the healing. Okay, so for that I'm telling you the confirmations, like after 7 weeks, or you can start it, but you need to see the precautions. Is there anything hindering or anything delaying? Means little bit gentle and slow movements are recommended. And one more thing is, before going to TheraBand, maybe you can teach them what is the what muscles are involved. So after isometrics, you can give manual strengthening exercises. After that, you can freely go for TheraBand. Otherwise, if they are very, it's easy for them to follow TheraBand exercise, or already they performed all sets of these types of TheraBand exercise. Everything is like a little bit easy for them, means you can start. But in the early stages, we can start with manual resistance and then move to this TheraBand activities. This other name is rhythmic stabilization. This exercise is one of the PNF technique, the proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation exercise. This is really helpful for gaining stability as well as balance. Okay. Okay, so we have other the same things, but if you want, we can see it later. Okay, after completing this upper limb fractures, we'll go into detail about this. Otherwise, you just observe the video. Okay, 2 parts are there. Okay, so these are the mobilization phase and the rehabilitation program for the protocol we have. Okay, so the first 6 weeks you can do all the sets of exercises, and then the after 7 weeks it should be like all the stretching, strengthening exercises, or and specifically rotator cuff and deltoid. These muscles are very important, and then we have that sternocleidomastoid, pectoralis major, and deltoid. These are all going around in and around the clavicle. That is origin and insertion of these three muscles are located here. So we need to give more importance to that. Okay, so that's all about our clavicle fracture. Okay. Any doubts in this? The clavicle fracture?
Miss, how you know which exercises to use? There are quite a lot.
Like after 7 weeks, all are very important. Okay, you can maybe you can teach them 5 exercises. Make sure that they are doing it correctly, and because it's up to us, and the level of the patient's ability, that is also that will decide the type of exercise you are choosing. Okay, so if he is a normal person without any like soft sometimes their job doesn't have hectic works, or they are like white collar jobs, means you can choose the average types of exercise, limited like it won't be that stressful. Or if he's a sports person or young adult, that kind of people, maybe their lifelong they need to improve that. So you can choose little bit extra 10 sets of exercise like that. It's up to us to decide. Okay, so depending on the patient, for elderly population you cannot have strengthening programs can be included, but it shouldn't be too vigorous. Slow and gentle progression is recommended. Okay, so we can choose it. Okay, it's not a strict rule that you have to include all the exercises. It's up to us to decide. You need to consider all the factors. The injury type, is there any associated injuries, soft tissue injuries, or the patient's tolerance and the motivation of the patient. Everything will decide your number of exercise as well as the type of exercise you are choosing. Okay.
Okay, Miss.
But this is the routine we have, like before 0 to 6 weeks, and after 6th week onwards, and or at the end of the 6th week, you need to be like you need to fasten up the rehabilitation. Whatever it's restricted can be, you can freely do that. Okay, so that is very important. And then now we are coming to shoulder dislocations. So the most common one is anterior dislocation, because we all know that the weak spot of your shoulder joint occurs in the anterior side. Can you tell me why it is the weak spot is in the anterior aspect? Why it is common also? Any guess? Yes. Anybody?
Sorry, not sure, Miss.
Not sure also.
We all know the anatomy, right? Just guess. I think it's not a you don't have to be correct. Just guess.
Maybe because in front there is like no scapula to support the shoulder, so more easy to dislocate. It's like that.
It is maybe it may be one of the reason, but we have in the capsule we have an opening in the anterior aspect. Okay, the capsule is one of the stabilizers, right? To provide stability, we need ligaments and capsule. But in the capsule anterior aspect, we have opening, and through that opening, your long end of biceps are going into that and get inserted. Okay, it is actually it's a more of the biceps muscle is actually it's outside the capsule, but the tendon is going inside the capsule. That opening is there. That is really a drawback for us. That opening weaken your capsule. Thereby, most weakest point is anterior. Okay, so and after that you have posterior. It's also very rare, 10%, and sometimes the shocks, some kind of electrical shocks and seizures can cause this posterior, very rare cases. And but commonly you expect anterior type of dislocations, that is the throwers throwing a ball, and that kind of movements, that is abduction and lateral rotation. That's what how you are throwing the ball, simply shoulder 90-degree abducted and externally rotated, thereby we throw a ball, right? So in that case, it's more causes anterior glide. Am I right? So if you're going abduction and lateral glide, means you can see that your head of humerus becomes more coming more anteriorly. So if you give it in a high speeds, there is a greater chance for it gets dislocated anteriorly. Okay, so the most common sports injuries, or very commonly for common man also, in some kind of any forceful movements and all, they get dislocated anterior. The inferior is also very rare. That is in the breech presentation during delivery or during labor time. The infants may have this inferior dislocation, very rare cases. Okay, otherwise the anterior one is common. So the mechanism of injury is fall on outstretched hand. Sometimes you're falling, or a weakness. There are various reasons. The weakness around your capsules and ligaments and muscles, everything can also dislocate it. And one more problem with this dislocation is, once you get this dislocation and without any treatment or without any rehabilitation, if you left just like that, means recurrence rate is 90%. It can repeat. Maybe in a month also, some cases I hear five times per month they get dislocated. So the recurrent rate is also very high, and it's very disturbing and uncomfortable. Anytime it get dislocated means, can you imagine the situation of the patient? They always feel that fear of doing the movement in shoulder joint. So, and one more thing is, any direct weight or blow on the posterior aspect of the shoulder. These are the two important mechanisms for dislocation. So how we can do it, like both examination, physical examination and radiographic examination, both are very important. Because I told you, right, within 120 minutes, that is within 2 hours, you need to reduce the dislocation. Am I right? So if you leave that, means it may cause some compression to any sensitive neurovascular structures. Okay, it may compress the axillary nerve, or it may compress any other vessels. Anything can be possible. So mainly the axillary nerve. Okay, so examine the axillary nerve. So both motor function, that is is there any weakness in the deltoid muscle, or apply resistance to abductors. Thereby you can easily check that. And you can check the sensation. Is there loss of sensation around the lateral aspect of the tip of shoulder? This region, that deltoid area, is mainly supplied by axillary nerve. So both sensory and motor supply of the axillary nerve should be checked. And then you have musculocutaneous nerve also. There is a greater chance for that also, because both are closer to each other. There is a greater chance for any of the nerve. So for musculocutaneous nerve, we all know the elbow flexus. Check the elbow flexus and anterolateral forearm sensation. So biceps, brachialis, coracobrachialis. These three muscles are supplied by musculocutaneous nerve. We need to be careful with examination. And all these are all like because of that complications of shoulder dislocation that need to be corrected. If you lengthen the period or lengthen the delay the dislocation to be corrected, means it may cause sometimes the temporary compression to prolonged, and the healing or the recovery of this muscles also get delayed. So how yearly you correct the dislocation, that much improvement you can expect. And then the radiographic thing is we will have different types of radiographs you can take. So anteroposterior view or axillary lateral or scapular Y, or this can be decided depending on the availability. Sometimes this radiographs can be taken with a clinical expertise. The radiographers have to attain certain levels to take this type of X-rays, or else they normally take lateral and AP view. So anterior dislocation rate. So age-wise, you can have incidence rate is 80 to 92% in the age of 20, okay, and age 30, 60%, and greater than 40, the dislocations are very rare because the high speed movements or this kind of things are mostly the fracture is common in after 40 plus. That is because of the bone weakness and all, and other things I told you, right? Other associated injuries. That's why you don't delay the correction to dislocation. Very important. So nerve, you have axillary nerve and vascular axillary nerve artery injury, and soft tissues. Maybe there is a greater chance for compression or tearing of any muscles, rotator cuff, tendon, or subscapularis. Anything is possible. And bony injuries also. Sometimes the eye impacted dislocations can, because of that, the strong bone is getting impinged on other structures, means it may damage it, right? So there is other injuries called Bankot's Ilsak's lesion, glenoid fracture, greater tuberosity fracture is also other associated injuries we have. So just check for these problems also. In the X-ray view, you need to check for Bankot's lesion, Ilsak's lesion, or glenoid fracture. Sometimes you feel the bruising or the color change. There is a bluish discoloration or blackish discoloration would be there. Then there is a greater chance for any soft tissue injuries or bony involvement. So in that case, any MRI can be recommended. Along with the X-rays alone won't give you a better viewing. Okay, so for that type of things, you need to rule out this. Excessive bruising is there, means tenderness, and it's really impossible to move the limb. In that case, you need to take MRI. Okay. In the X-rays, you cannot see this kind of these two things. Bankot's and Ilsak's lesion is not that evident in X-rays. Okay, so the anterior dislocation, we have different reasons. Traumatic, atraumatic, acquired. Okay, traumatic means maybe any sports involvement or accidents and that kind of thing. Atraumatic means maybe the inborn laxity. Some people you may have seen, right? So they have that more unstable, more looseness in the joint. Okay, so they are more flexible. In that thing also, it is very common. You can see that some people are they can extend. Hyperextension of elbow is also possible, or the finger hyperextension. Some people are genetically more laxed. In that case also it develops. And acquired, that is maybe due to like during growing stage, they may develop that, or sometimes some occupations or some work can make them more prone to dislocations. Sometimes this gymnastic people or ballet dancers, these people need more flexibility. So they, from childhood, they may flex or they may stretch their muscles on capsules in a greater range compared to normal population, and that can also cause dislocations, very common. So this posterior dislocation very rare, but you can easily find out. That is, we have light bulb sign or Bacon glenoid sign. You can see that here in between that you can see some kind of development. That is what we call light bulb sign or Bacon glenoid sign. And the movement is, that's what the electrical shocks and seizures can cause overpull of some muscles. Okay, and another thing is exactly opposite to what I told you for internal for anterior dislocation. For anterior dislocation, abduction and external rotation is a great that is the main reason. For posterior dislocation, you have exactly opposite, adduction, flexion, and internal rotation. If you do this kind of combinations, can cause posterior dislocation. Okay. So you always give a reduction immediately. So for anterior dislocation, you need to give posterior translation, and for posterior dislocation, you need to give because we have the glenoid, the head of humerus is convex, right? So it is our concave convex rule is exactly opposite. And we have inferior dislocation. So here in the in the breech presentation, you have this type of injuries, hyperabduction injury, and other one is, there is a, if it is an inferior dislocation, the 90% or higher chances for nerve and vascular injury. Okay, treatment mostly non-operative reduction. Okay, so close reduction should be performed, but some cases we need under anesthesia. This reduction can be done under anesthesia because it's too painful, the patient cannot tolerate. And reduction techniques, we have different reduction techniques are available. So when you have assistant or when you have equipments, we can choose among these different techniques. We have traction and counter traction method and Hippocratic technique. So mainly we don't have an important role in this reduction techniques, but knowing the techniques and all, it's very important. Whenever in emergency or in need, you need to know that all the techniques available. Okay, Stimson technique. So the first we will see traction and counter traction. So this one is one second. Yes, Stimson technique. This is what Stimson technique. Okay, make them prone lying and ask them to hold any weights. Okay, this is Stimson technique. So if you don't have any attendant, any assistants or caregivers, means the only person can do this way. Okay, so the leg should be placed on our joint line, and then one hand, using your hand, you should give traction. So traction, counter traction can be given. It's an old method. Nowadays we are very rarely using this. So this is Hippocratic technique. Okay, so one foot is placed across the axillary fold, and then you can give some axial traction. Okay, so we don't have this in other other PowerPoint. I have this. If you want, we will see what is traction and counter traction method.
Okay, so this video is going to cover as many different shoulder dislocation reduction techniques as possible here. Okay, and so let's go for it.
So you can have an assistant for doing a prone technique for scapular manipulation. You can have an assistant just apply gentle anterior traction within the prone position. Again, same thing. You come in and you get your thumb into position on the acromion, on the scapular wing. You're going to rotate with the scapular wing going.
Okay.
So with the spazo technique, you're going to have them lay flat on their back. You're going to take them into vertical traction or anterior traction to the body, and you're going to do external rotation. So you're going to basically externally rotate the arm or supinate the hand. And you're going to continue that traction. You can also put a little bit of pressure on the chest. But you're unable to do scapular manipulation with that. This one, I'm not as familiar with. You said you've done this in the past.
This is my go-to.
Okay, so again, they're in that same position, holding themselves at not full internal rotation. They're going to have their arm in this position. So the technique that's in the books is keeping the elbow adducted. You're going to allow it to externally rotate. You're supporting the arm, and that's to give them the sense that they're not just going to flop right out. It helps them relax. You're just going to bring it out into external rotation, and this should reduce the shoulder.
I find in my own experience, you have to almost do exaggerate external rotation. And then sometimes I don't even feel it going in. I don't feel it pop. But then when I bring it back, then it goes all the way back down.
Now you talk also about padding on the inside to help
Right.
with a little bit of lateral distraction.
Right.
So you pad on the inside, a little lateral distraction, same rotation.
Right.
Now,
And it's not uncommon for me to go ahead and put in 20 cc's of lidocaine into the joint in addition prior to this. And give it a few minutes for it to absorb for pain control.
So with the Mills technique, again, we're starting with the external rotation. We take them out to full external rotation. We don't get any reduction. From there, we're going to take them into full adduction, keeping them externally rotated.
Abduction.
Yeah, abduction. And you're going to take them into overhead extension. You're going to apply gentle traction on the humerus with direct pressure over the humeral head. All right, so lay down flat. So with traction, counter traction, so you're going to come up high in the shoulder. And it's just like it sounds. So he's going to be pulling traction going direction against my traction. I'll be basically, you're going to keep her from moving, and I'm just going to move back. So all I'm doing, the key to this is gentle traction. Now, one thing you will see a lot of people, and I've seen people do this, is they'll start trying to reef on it because this is kind of an aggressive approach in general. All it is gentle traction. What you want to overcome are the four muscles that are in the rotator cuff. And if you just keep that constant tension, they're eventually going to relax on their own. So it's not the amount of force, it's the gradual traction that's applied. Okay, great. So this is the Fairey's technique for anterior shoulder dislocation reduction. So you're going to have the patient lay with their arm completely to their side. And again, they're going to want to try and keep it preferentially up, but you just kind of gradually coax them into this position right here. You're going to apply distal traction. You're going to start manipulating, shoulder coming into abduction, going up and down, 10-degree arc. So that up and down motion is intended to relax the rotator cuff muscles. Now, if you don't have an obvious reduction of the joint at 90 degrees, okay. If you don't have an obvious reduction at 90 degrees, you can, at that point, externally rotate the arm and continue. And that should reduce the shoulder. The Cunningham technique for reducing the shoulder. So help sit down and lie on the patient. Have the patient go ahead and rest their palm, grab your shoulder. Now, again, getting them into this position, I get my face. Getting them into this position is key because they're going to be really tense about it. So you're going to rest your arm in the crease of their elbow and they're going to hold on. And that's going to create a little bit of gentle distal traction. You're just going to massage the bicep. Okay. All right. Now you want.
They also straighten up their shoulders.
I was getting there, sir.
Okay.
I was getting there. You can just hop in. Am I narrating this or you? Anyway, they're going to sit upright and they're going to take their shoulder blades back and keep their back. Let's sit upright. All right. So at this point, I'm going to just be massaging. She's going to try and keep her posture as in line as possible, which helps keep the scapula in advantageous position for reduction. And you just want to make sure that you're rubbing on the areas involving the rotator cuff. So supraspinatus and infraspinatus regions, and a little bit on the anterior shoulder, and they should reduce.
Okay, so the biceps, deltoid, and all that stuff gets massaged.
Yes.
Got it.
So Stimson technique for anterior shoulder dislocation reduction. You have the patient in the prone position with their arm extended in front of them. Hardest part is to get them into this position in a relaxed fashion where you don't tense up. You go ahead and place a harness on. This one has an inflatable cuff to help secure it to the forearm. Just go ahead and verify that they actually have a distal pulse before you go apply the bag. All you're going to do is bag about 10 to 15 pounds traction, or a 10 to 15 pound weight bag, and it's going to apply gentle traction. Your key thing, you want to make sure that the bag actually hangs off the floor and you have enough distance for it to go. Now, a variant on this would be again, you could do the prone technique of scapular manipulation along with the Stimson technique, which would just then make it the prone technique. Yeah. So identify the acromion, scapular wing, translate the inferior scapular wing. You should get a reduction. Go ahead and lay flat. So the counter traction for inferior dislocation. So the patient's going to generally present with their arm in the fully abducted position, arm above their head, inability to mobilize the joint. So you're going to drop the sheet under their body. Your assistant's going to go ahead and do counter traction. Just grab control the arm. You distract the humerus, pulling it back into alignment. With the ongoingly, it should reduce. So this is reduction of posterior dislocation. Oftentimes patients will present with their belly or their hand flat against their belly. So essentially it's going to start a lot like traction, counter traction with the anterior technique. So for in this instance, we will stay anterior. We're going to go ahead with external rotation. So we're going to externally rotate and draw them anterior. Continuing external rotation. Other methods you can add to it with the external rotation, grab the humeral head and attempt to guide it anteriorly along with that traction. You can also place the sheet up in the axe pocket to help draw if you're unable to fit the angle on it. Apply the force.
So we have different methods, and each and everything has some pros and cons. Okay, we can select it. So after that, so our part is like after reduction only. So we need to like a confirmation that whether it is settles or whether it is aligned its original position. So post reduction films or X-ray should be taken, and controlling the pain. So the pain control is very important, and immobilization period is less because if there is no fracture or no soft tissue involvement, only immobilization period is just 7 to 10 days or just 2 weeks, and then we can start progress all types of range of motion and strengthening exercises. And so operative indication when we need operative means sometimes when you tried 4 or 5 times of techniques also cannot reduce it, sometimes because of soft tissue interruption and all, you cannot reduce it. In that case you need operative one, or recurrence also, the rate of recurrence also higher, or sometimes it causes any associated fractures, displaced greater tuberosity fracture or glenoid rim fracture that is bigger than 5 mm, or younger patients if it is needed, that is sports people or highly involved in any high levels of activities, shoulder activities. In that case also operative indications is beneficial. Okay, so what is the protocol we have is so achieve the normal activity. We just have 7 to 10 days of strict immobilization, right? So after that you can slowly improvise. So in the first 3 weeks, if he's in the period of immobilization, arm is held in adduction and internal rotation, and so that is in the surgical procedure you can have the period of immobilization for 7 to 10 days is enough, or if it is a conservative then you can delay it for till 3 weeks or till the confirmation that it's healed the soft tissues. And is there any involvement, you can delay up to 3 weeks. Otherwise only purely it's a dislocation means 7 to 10 days is enough. Okay, so only wrist and fingers are left free, and other things it's held in adduction and internal rotation. That is the thing. After 3 weeks strapping can be removed. That is if they are not doing any daily activities or any range of motion exercises, they need to apply that the slings for continuously for 3 weeks. After that you can remove the slings, and strapping is removed. Any incision or sutures can be removed, but sling can be used till they achieve full strengthening. That is very important. Full strengthening of rotator cuff. Okay, that is it's not going to be full, but it should achieve the perfect balance. The atrophy or weakness is there means it's not it's not better advice that they remove the sling. Elbow exercises, shoulder, like clavicular exercise we have, right? Elbow exercises can be started, and shoulder pendular exercises, and in that itself, flexion, extension, abduction, adduction. And only thing is that what you have to do is this abduction, the end range abduction and external rotation should be avoided. Okay, so that is because that is an easy chance for anterior dislocation. So you can avoid this movements. Okay, so the caution is required to do this movements, and also if you are starting, you do passive movements. Okay, so the precautions for shoulder dislocation is abduction and lateral rotation should be avoided. And after full strengthening or partial strength, that is, you are sure about it is not weak. The rotator cuff muscles are not weak means you can remove the sling and you can go for full strengthening program. Until that point, you can give isometrics to all the rotator cuff muscles and everything, because the main stabilizer is your rotator cuff muscles. If it is weak, or if you are not starting the yearly isometrics, it is highly risky to highly risky to remove the sling, or so that is the main reason. The rotator cuff muscle strengthening is very, very important. Start with isometrics, and then manual resistance, and then further progress to TheraBand exercise. And after that, you can go for dynamic strengthening exercises. Weights, pulleys can be added. Now we are coming to proximal humerus fracture. Do you want break, or shall we continue?
Can I have a short break, please?
Okay.
We'll
We'll
give
have
me-
on 15, 7 minutes later we'll start. Okay, let's start. Shall we start?
Yes, miss.
Okay, so before that, we need to have some clarification on this shoulder immobilization period for shoulder dislocation, right? So the recurrence, I told you, right? The recurrence of dislocations are very common in the young age group. That is the population of 20 to 25 years. Okay, so in that case, we need to have um, fixed mobilization for, like, if it is a less than 20 years, you need to immobilize for 3 to 4 weeks. Okay, and 20 to 30 years, if the patient is 20 to 30 years old, you need to immobilize them for 2 to 3 weeks. And if it is greater than 30 years, 10 days to 2 weeks is enough. Okay, and if they are greater than 40 years, the person is 40 years, greater than 40 years old, then 3 to 5 days also is more than enough. Okay, so the immobilization cannot be fixed one. Don't think that we have talked about 3 weeks and somewhere it is 10 days, right? So what does that means? The age will decide, because the recurrence rate is high in the young population, not in the elderly. Okay, very rarely elderly can go for high speed movements or any sports activities. The recurrence rate is very less compared to young age group. That's why the immobilization period is also high, for because they need complete recovery. So that's what if it is less than 20 years old, 3 to 4 weeks of immobilization is important. And if he's 20 to 30 years old, in between that, they need to have for 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, and greater than 30 years, 2 weeks, and greater than 40 years, only 3 to 5 days. Okay, so this is very important. Age can change the treatment, way of treatment, because after 40 years old, only 5 days for reducing the pain is enough. After that, you can gradually start. And one more thing is the protocol for non-operative shoulder dislocation management is, the first thing is the phase 1 or the first week, first 0 to 2 weeks. Here the main thing is immobilization and pain control. So in most of the conditions, we need to control the pain in the first weeks. Okay, so the first 2 weeks, the pain control and immobilization, and then you can have, like, after removing the slings, you can allow shoulder ranges. Maybe you can start doing shoulder range of motion, and then elbow also. You can start doing elbow exercises, and we can use isometrics. Surely you can do it in the first weeks, grip exercises and isometrics you can start. And in the week 3 to 4, in the first 2 weeks we started this, and then in the week 3 to 4, you have to the pain, actually in this stage, the pain and tenderness can be reduced. Almost it's tolerable pain only exists, and remaining times, if they are not doing exercises, always make them be in immobilization. Always use the slings. Okay, and one more thing is, what are the restrictions? What are the restrictions you need to follow in the 3rd to 4th week is, avoid extension. That's why I told you, right? Avoid extension, abduction, and external rotation. These movements are like, it's a more unstable movements, or it may cause more chance for dislocation. So don't go for this type of provocative motions. Okay, and then other than that, you can improvise up to 140 degrees of flexion and 40 degrees of extension, but arm is by the side. Always don't do it in the abduction 90 degree and external rotation, internal rotation. Always arm is by the side in the 3rd to 4th week, it should be by the side and do a mild, gentle external rotation. And don't go for more than 140 degree. These are all precautions in the 3rd to 4th week. So avoid any provocative actions like abduction, external rotation, and external rotation. 3 movements: abduction, external rotation, and extension. This combination is called throwing, right? So you need to avoid that. And then don't go beyond 140 degree of flexion and 40 degrees of external rotation, right? And that's it. Okay, these are the 2 important don'ts. Okay, more than 140 degree flexion. Don't go for more than 40 degree of external rotation, but arm by the side. Okay, after that, you can start active exercises, passive exercise, active assisted. All the exercises can be started in this phase itself. And strengthening also, you can increase the isometric force. The resistance you are applying in the isometrics can be increased. Okay, so muscle strengthening, rotator cuff, internal rotator, external rotation, forward flexion, everything can be increase the isometrics in the next stage. Okay, this is the progression for this dislocation. I will give you this protocol maybe in tomorrow's class. I will give you all the details of shoulder dislocation. Okay, so always the safe period is after 6 weeks. You can start the muscle strengthening. Full-fledged muscle strengthening can be started after 6 weeks. Before that, you always stick on with isometrics, right? Isometrics and available range, maintain or increase the available range of motion. Okay, now we are coming to the proximal humerus fracture. Can you see this? This is actually displaced. Can you see that it is close to head of humerus? This is impacted, that is more stable compared to this type of fracture. This is far better. Can you see that? So that pattern of fractures also tells you what type of movements can be started. Okay, so this is impacted. Impacted means it's more stable. That is, it's a one segment goes into other one. So this is impacted fracture. It's more stable. So what they do is reduce it or give a traction, and then the proper reduction is attained, and then they will do it POP application or functional casting, anything. It's a little easy to manage this case compared to this one. Can you see that? The head of the humerus is there. Parallel to that, you have the shaft. Okay, this is to come in. It's a type of more complex one. Okay, in this case, you need to go for surgery. Otherwise, again and again, when you reduce it, the conservative management also, you cannot correct it. It cannot give you 100% result. So in this type of fractures, right? So you can, everything should be discussed. Some complicated or atypical presentation should be discussed, and then you can progress. Okay. So the proximal humerus fracture, it's the most common out of in the humerus fracture. This is very common, and the incidence is elderly. So that is the osteoporotic cases, either femur, the proximal femur fracture, or this one, proximal humerus fractures are very high. Okay, and female population, like the hip femur fracture. Here also the female population has higher incidence because we have so many things, right? We will discuss it later. So the females has greater chance to get the bone brittleness. Okay. Mechanism: fall on the outstretched arm, maybe or from a standing height. And for young age people, this is a maybe motor vehicle accident. And one more thing is the main clinical examination is you need to check the neurovascular tissues like shoulder dislocation. Here also the axillary nerve is commonly get affected, and check the deltoid and lateral aspect of shoulder joint for sensation. And then you can see that always held the arm by the close to the chest, that is by the trunk itself they place it. Okay, so fear of movement or due to severe pain, they always make it very consciously, they place it by the side, and the pain would be there, and they won't cooperate with you. And crepitus, you can see some kind of bone vibration. Okay, and we have the proximal humerus fractures are divided. We have for each and every fracture, we have some classification, right? So here also for knee classification, we have for proximal humerus. So the knee classification is actually in the proximal segment. What are the areas? What are the structures you have? Head, shaft, greater and lesser tuberosity. These are the 4 structures we have in the proximal segment of humerus. All right, the head of the humerus, the shaft, a part of the shaft, and then greater and lesser tuberosity. Okay, so in this part, whether it is a 2-part or 3-part or 4-part, accordingly we can classify it. Maybe only greater tuberosity is broken, or when only lesser tuberosity means it's a 1-part fracture. It's a more stable. If it is a 1-part, then it is okay. We call it 2-part. Okay, either a fracture means it's divided into 2 things, right? So the greater tuberosity or any one structure is dissected means we call it 2-part. 3-part means it's it's divided into 3 pieces or 3 components. And 4-part is almost it's a crushed one or comminuted fractures. In that thing, you need to go for a surgical fixation. So when it is safe, means if it is less than 1 centimeter displacement, it's a very stable. So the part is displaced less than 1 centimeter or less than 45 degree of angulation, then we call it, we can go for conservative. Simple. 1 centimeter, less than 1 centimeter or less than 45 degrees of angulation, then we can have conservative management. Otherwise, it's you need to go for surgical. So we have like in the 2-part fracture and 3-part and then 4-part classification. Okay. The treatment for the proximal humerus fracture, that's why minimally displaced means a sling immobilization and yearly movement. So it's a perfect stable fractures. Always stable fractures are easy to treat. Okay, so sling, just make them in a sling immobilization and start the yearly motion. Okay, next one is 2-part fracture. So after that, this kind of thing, 2-part, 3-part, 4-part, everything is unstable one. So you need to go for open reduction and internal fixation. So any displacement greater than 1 centimeter, just remember that if it is displaced greater than 1 centimeter, then you need to go for any open reduction, internal fixation. So if it's a 4-part fracture, it's like a more crushed and powdered from some pieces or some segments are crushed into powder form, means you may have bone loss. You cannot recover the crushed one, right? In that case, they need to go for arthroplasty. So implants, artificial implants like hip arthroplasty, you need to go for some kind of artificial implants. The whole head of humerus should be substituted, or the whole the glenoid fossa should be substituted. Okay, so this is hemiarthroplasty means maybe the distally our humerus is substituted, not the glenoid rim. Okay, so 2-part and 3-part you can go for ORIF, and 4-part fractures, it's arthroplasty is the highly advisable suggestion. And then we have humeral shaft fractures. So comparatively, the safe, more safe fractures are shaft 1. Okay, the middle third fractures. So direct blow to that aspect. Maybe any hit in the, maybe he is any vehicle or anything get hit on the this segment. That is the reason. The direct trauma or impact, that is high impacted weighted objects, and indirect trauma is fall on an outstretched hand. And fracture pattern, so the fracture is occurs, maybe I told you, either it is an impacted fracture or bending or torsional and bending. We have different kind of forces can disturb the healing or disturb the fracture. Okay, the compressive one is the proximal or distal humerus. A bending force, any bending force is there means it can cause transverse fracture of the shaft. And then the torsional, any twisting force is there means you can get spiral fracture. And twisting and bending force means you can have oblique fracture. Okay, so here also the clinical examination is history collection and physical examination. So the pain, swelling, crepitus, and deformity, you can see some prominence in the middle of the bone. It's little abnormal, and you can expect some movements also, and abnormal movements, abnormal flabby movements would be there. And radial nerve. So here, not in the proximal humerus, you have axillary nerve, right? So in the middle shaft fractures, you can get more commonly a radial nerve injury. Okay, so wrist drop is more common, and check the extensor muscles. Extensor muscle and the posterior aspect of forearm and hand region will tell you the sensory disturbances. And radiographic examination, AP and lateral view. Okay. So humeral shaft fracture, conservative treatment is you already have very less displacement, and angulation is also very less, so easy to heal this. So the greater than 90% of humeral shaft fractures are healed by this method. Okay, simply POP casting and then the functional cast bracing. Okay, we have seen, right, there is a splint application, co-splint. So operative treatment. So we have like more all displacements greater than 1 centimeter and 45-degree angulation. Greater than that, you have to go for any screws, plates, and intramedullary nailing. The distal 1/3 of the shaft fractures, we call it Holstein-Lewis fracture. Okay, this is greatly in this low level fractures, you can get maybe 90% of radial nerve injury. This type of low level fractures commonly commonly related to radial nerve. Okay, so we need to be very, very careful when it is a distal 1/3 fracture. So after this, So after this, we call it supracondylar. Okay. So till this level, it is considered as shaft only. So any fracture in this area, we call it supracondylar. Okay, so tomorrow we will see elbow fractures and dislocation. Let's wind up. Okay, thank you all. Thank you. Bye. See you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Miss. See you tomorrow. Bye.
I will share this. Okay, this PPT in WhatsApp. I will share it.
Okay,
Bye.
Miss. Bye bye.